Now, on the bottom of Daf Hey Amid Beis, the Gemara says the following: Lo, which is the last word on the page. Now, what does this word lo mean as an introduction to Daf Vav? We wanted to suggest that when the Brisa says that we derive from Eshabsose Tishmoru Ani Hashem, Kulchem Chayom Bechvodi, that the mitzvah of Kibbutz Avayim does not override the Shabbos. And we said that apparently there was an assumption before this drasha of Eshabsose Tishmoru that Kibbutz Avayim, if your father tells you to slaughter something for him or prepare the meat for him by cooking, then you would listen to your father and override the Shabbos. And that means that Esei Dochalo Sachech Bokaris. Gemara says, "Lo, no, that's not what the Bryce has in mind. It's not a case where your father told you to slaughter an animal on his behalf, or to cook the meat on his behalf, but rather here taking a look on Daf Vav Amud Aleph, Lav de Mechamer. What your father is asking is that you violate the Lav of Mechamer, which means Lahanig Avuro Behema Shosam Lochs. You have a beast of burden, and there's a burden on top of the beast. You're not allowed to lead the animal on Shabbos, and this is derived from a pasuk in the Aseret Dibros. It says, "V'yom hashvi Shabbos Hashem Elokecha lo taseh kol malacha atah," etc., etc. Uvem techa. And this lav of lo taseh b'mem techa, you don't work the animal for you on Shabbos. That's a lav she'ein bo kares. It's not one of the 39 malachos. And basically, the malacha is done by the animal, not by the person, as opposed to the 39 malachos where the person is personally involved his goof is involved in the malacha. Now, in this case, we have a serious havamina that Esei Docha Losa said, because the Losa said that we're involved in here is only a regular lav, and it doesn't have kares. And we would apply the principle of Esei Docha Losa, which you've already derived from the line Mitzitzis. We don't need this drasha. But if in a case of a lav chamber kares, then we wouldn't need this miut, this exception of the alfusa of Ani Hashem. It would be simple, and it would be understood that ain Esei Docha Losa Sashesh Bo Kares. And therefore, we go back to our original question: why do we need the pasuk leha to exclude yibum in a case of achos ishto? What was the havamina that we would say Esei Docha Losa says, since achos ishto is a lav sheish bo kares? So the Gemara says the following: now I have a real problem, because vafilu hachi, you're telling me that even though the clash in the case of mechamer is between an Esei and a lav, regular lav, not a lav sheish bo kares, and afilu hachi lo dachi, the Torah is teaching me with the pasuk of Eshab Sosei Tishmoru that you don't override the lav of mechamer for the sake of kibbutz av. So then Ella, the Kaimelon Esei Docha Losa said, Ligmar mihacha de lo lidche. Why don't we turn this drasha into a binyan av to teach me that, on the contrary, Esei does not override a losas. And you're telling me that we derive from Kalayim B'tzitzis that Esei is Docha Losas. On the contrary, let's derive from Eshab Sosei Tishmoru that ain Esei Docha Losas. That's the Gemara's cap. What we want to do now is to study Osvis Dibra Maskil Nigmar Mihacha Delo Dachi on Daf Vav Amud Aleph. Tosas says mashma the irony if the pasuk would be referring to shchita and bichul nicha, then we would understand that as a general rule Say would be dochel kares, and that's why we need the pasuk of Aleha in the case of Yibum with an achos ishto. So there seems to be a little bit of an inconsistency here in this Gemara, because the Gemara would be very satisfied with an answer to its question, why do we need a pasuk in the case of Yibum, if we were talking about a case in this brayso where your father commanded you to violate one of the malachos of Shabbos. If, on the other hand, we're talking about a case of a chamer, which is a regular lav, then the Gemara has a problem of veligmar mineh. Let's derive from this drasha that ain't essay dochalosas. What's going on here? If it would have been a case of shchita and bishul, everything would be smooth. And then we would derive from here that as a general rule, essay does not override a losus sheyesh bo kares. I'm sorry, as a general rule, essay overrides a lav sheyesh bo kares. And Shabbos is the exception to the rule. And therefore, if essay dochalos sheyesh bo kares, I understand why I need a pasuk called Leah to derive that we don't apply that principle in the case of Yibum. But now that we're talking about Mechamen, the Gemara has a problem, because we should derive from here that ain't essay dochalos. So if your principle is that let's look at the final maskana, derived from Eshav Sosai Tishmarni Hashem, that we don't override the Shabbos. In this case, Mechamer, that's going to set up a rule for Kol HaTorah Kula that ain't essay dochalosa. So why don't you do the same thing if the brisa in our original interpretation was referring to Basheli or Shchotli, and say that now that we have the maskana of Eshav Sosei Tishmarni Hashem, we should derive the conclusion that Nigmar Minei, this is a binyan av, that ain't essay dochalosis sheyesh bo kares. Why was the Gemara happy and satisfied if we're talking about Basheli and Shchotli, but the Gemara in Machamer is unhappy because Nigmar Minei should become a binyan av, and we should derive a universal principle that ain't essay dochalosis. Why don't we derive a universal principle in the case of Basheli from this brisa and the drach, the limud from Eshav Sos Tishmo, that the universal rule is that ein essay dochalos sheyesh bo kares. I mean, your whole purpose and your excitement from this brisa was to establish that in general essay dochalos sheyesh bo kares. Mashma the I ikra b'shchita b'shol nicha. We wouldn't have asked the question, Nigmar mihacha de alma lo doch. On the contrary, we would have said that alma, as a general rule, essay is dochalosa, even in a losa sheyesh bo kares. And we would have said, well, the fact that the Torah needed a pasuk to teach me that the essay of Kibbutz Avim does not override the Shabbos, it means that in general, as a universal rule, essay would override a lav sheyesh bo kares. And if that be the case, why not say the same thing here, plug it in the same logic here, that if we're talking about a case of a chamer, then from the fact that the Torah told us that the lav of Mechamer does not lend itself to dechia, or in a more positive sense, the essay of Kibbutz Av does not override lav Mechamer, that means that in general, the rule would be that essay dochalos. And that would answer the Gemara's kasha. So let's see if we can fit this into the language of Tosfos. The Tema. I mean, nole l'tana. How do we know that the Tana, now it's a little tricky here. The word Tana is not referring to the brisa that we're studying here about Eshav Sosei Tishmoru Kibbutz Av versus Shabbos, but rather to the brisa that was quoted back on Daf Gimel that derive from the word oleha, that esse docha losa sashish bokares, inole litana leutme kra ishchitu bishol, lachminid bi alma dochi esse as a general rule would override a lav shish bokares, and that's why we need oleha. Nukma belav de mechamer, with his no kares, v'nigmari hocha tibi alma lo dochi esse afilu lav great. So right now, Tosfos is not asking our kasha. Maybe it'll come a little bit later on in this Tosfos. At this point, he's wondering what led the Tana back on Daf Gimel, the Tana we'll call it the Tana Voleo, just to simplify it, to the conclusion that this brisa here is talking about a case of shchotli or basheli, and therefore derived that Esi Dochalosis Bialma, even if it's Losis. What pushed him in that direction? Why not just interpret the brisa as referring to Mecham? Tana had a diuk in this brisa that we're talking about Shchita and Bishul. How so? The Delo Ashmein and Kra, Bishar Dvarim, Deleka Elalav Grade. Now, the words Delo Ashmein and Kra refer to Delo Asi Ese Vidachi Losas. The pasuk does not tell me that we don't apply the rule of essay overriding a losas. Bishar dvarim, the leka elolav grade. So many negatives. You have to sift through all the negatives here. So let's see if we can work this out. The lo havi asina limite. Tarei says, "I osalashmi ino I osmakorolam denu panavi alma lo dachli es greater king havili mitavcha." Again, let me try it one more time. If you can bear with me, the language Tosfos is very, very difficult. He says, "V'yeshlomer dedaya katana midelo ashmeina kra b'shar dvarim deleka elalav greda delo aviaisinon limite." Osel Rahmana Denu Khan. I think what he's saying is the following, that the Tana here is, so to speak, guilty of ambiguity. And the ambiguity could lead us to a mistake. By setting up the Ani Hashem in a case of a conflict between an essay and Shabbos, it leads us to the possibility of making an error, which is called Aisina Limit, meaning Shabbos could be referring to Kares, an Isa Kares, or it could be referring to a separate Isa Lav, a classic Isa Lav. That lends us to a certain ambiguity because now we have to figure out if Shabbos is the exception to the rule, what would the rule be? And now it's very confusing because the rule might be one of two possibilities. It might be that an essay cannot be docha regular lotas, or it might mean that an essay cannot be docha a lotas sheish bo karetz. So instead of picking up Shabbos as the example of essay docha losas, it should have picked up a case of a lav greater. A lav greater meaning a lav which does not generate currents. Because then we would derive the conclusion that essay docha losas, meaning a losas ain't bo currents. There would be no room to make a mistake and derive the conclusion that essay docha losas, even in the case of a lav sheish bo currents. The only reason we have room to make that error is because the Brisa addresses a case of Shabbos, which has not only a lav like Machaber, but also has a malacha like Bashali and Shchotli. So if the pasuk is coming to teach you that in general, ein essay docha lo saseh, that's the svar of the ligmar ma'chacha, right? That ein essay docha lo saseh. So then why would the Brisa have given us a case of Shabbos where we might come to the mistake and think that essay is docha lo saseh, as long as it's a regular lotas? But in the case of Shabbos, it's a lotas sheish bo karetz. So therefore, if the Brisa wanted to make sure and be certain to teach me that ein essay docha lo saseh, regular lo saseh, even regular, then it should have mentioned the case other than Shabbos. Just going to read this footnote one more time. He says, in Cain, have lemichtav habemakom chevadai ein bo el lav grade k'dei shelo nita lo malehepet nachshav di'af lelav sheyesh bo kares dochi וכשאף על פי כן כוסף אחרונך בשבס, על כוח תיארי קרוא בשחית ובישל, עמדנו בעלמא דוחי יעשה אף... that we're talking about a case of Otli or Bisheli, Midalo Ashmin and Kra, Shar Dvarim. See, I'm trying to figure out what it means, the Lo Ashmin and Kra. Lo Ashmin and Kra, that essay dochalosa, or Lo Ashmin and Kra, that we don't apply the principle of essay dochalos. That's what's confusing. The Lo Ashmin and Kra, the Shar Dvarim, the Lekamem El Lav Greba, Lo Avi Asina Limite, the toes here? Essay dochalosa sashesh bokares. If the pasuk was referring to a regular lav, and it would teach me that essay eno dochalosas in this case, but in other cases, essay is dochalosas. That would make sense. But certainly, essay cannot be dochalosas shesh bokares. But by mentioning the case of Shabbos, then it's asina limite. We can make a mistake. And we can come to the conclusion that essay dochalosas, even in the case of a lav sheyesh bokares, that would have been the mistake that we would make. So therefore, the Tana assumed that we were talking about Odli Basheli, implying that the Alma, even in the case of a lav sheyesh bokares, we would apply the principle of essay dochalosas. I think the words in Tosis, the lo ashmeinan kra, mean a lo ashmeinan kra, should mean that essay dochalosas. But if the Torah wanted to teach us that essay dochalosas, it should have picked up a case of a lav greda, then we would certainly derive the conclusion that although essay dochalosa lav the alma, lav greda, but it would not be docha a lav sheish bokaretz. In other words, by mentioning Shabbos, the implication is that the alma essay dochalosa sheish bokaretz. Osi essay dochi aflosa sheish bokaretz. If, on the other hand, the Torah wants to teach me that as a general rule, we don't apply the principle of Osi Vidachilosas, then he should have told us in a case which is absolutely clear that the implication is Einasi Dochalosas, even a lav grade. But once you mention Shabbos, then you're already open to the possibility that the pasuk is talking about a lav sheish bokares in the case of Basheli. And therefore I derive the conclusion that the Alma Osi Essay Vidochilosa Sheish Bokares. Okay. The Imtomar now tells us the Kasha, the Hechi, Nigmar Me'achadolo Dochi. How can we derive from the lav of Machamet that in general we don't apply the principle of essay dochalosas, the Dilma Shiny Hochad Habi essay dolosas, Doksiv, Bayom Ashvi, Tishbos, Man, Yoniach, Yanuach Shorcha B'chamor. So he's saying the following, that in this case of Mechamer, we're dealing not only with a lotas, but also with an essay. And the essay is B'yom Hashvi Tishbos L'man Yeruach Shorcha B'chamorcha. So the Yisur Mechamer, in addition to being a lav lotasa, and it says Atu Bem Tefa, it's also an essay. Umishum Hachi Udelo Doch. The reason why the mitzvah saseh of kibbut av does not override mechamer is because einasi dochalosa sevies. Aval lav greda, if it wasn't a lotas that was supported by an addition by an essay, liolam neilus bikalayim mitzitzis the dochi essay, losas. So why is the Gemara upset over here? The Gemara says, wait a minute, if we're talking about Mechamer, let's derive from here the conclusion that Ein Esi Dochalosas, against Kalayim. Tosus is asking, no. The reason why Ein Esi Dochalosas in this case is only because the Lotas said Ve'esa, L'man Yanuach Sharva. But as a general rule, Ese would be Dochalosas. So what bothers the Gemara? Avalav greater liolam nelif bikalayim b'tzitzis b'dochi esei lilotas. Omeri yasei the kibud hov odif kulei high the hukash kvodam lekvodam mokum. Now he's upgrading the status of kibud aim as a mitzvah. It's therefore choshiv esei d'shabbos kemanda leso legam. So it means that because Kibbud Av Ha'im is such a powerful essay, therefore it overwhelms the Lotas of Shabbos. V'havi kiman delek elolav great. So the superior weight of Kibbud Aim now makes the lav of Shabbos into a lav greater. It's in like an inverse relationship. You know, when the seesaw goes up on one side, it goes down on the other side. I think what he's saying is that the essay of Hukash Kvodam, in the case of Kibbud Aim, completely neutralizes the essay of Lamanya Nuach, reducing Machamer to a lav great. That's going to answer Tos's Kash. Because how do you derive from this drasha Machamer that Ein Esei Dochalosa? Maybe it's only because it's a lotasa and an issa. It's not only lotasa kamalacha atov bincha etc. ubemtecha, but it's also manyanua. But as a general rule, essay would override a losas. So Tosus answers that this is not essay versus a losas of the essay, but rather this is essay versus a losas. How did you get rid of that essay of Mechamer? And the answer is because the essay of Shabbos, insofar as Sukash Kodem L'Kodem Mokum, is such a high-powered essay that it completely neutralizes the essay of Lamanya as if it didn't exist. And what you're left with is the law. And therefore, if you're left with the law, we're going to derive from here the conclusion that ain't essay dochalos. Mochen essay de migdash. More later on is going to bring the mitzvah of building a Beis Hamikdash, and it says Esham Sosai Tishmoru Umikdashi Tiro. The Gemara is going to derive from that ain't binyan Beis Hamikdash Docha Shai. Was there a hava meaning that binyan Beis Hamikdash would be Docha Shabbos? The Gemara answers no. It's a case of lav de macham. So the Gemara again is going to derive, is going to ask the question. Let's derive from this the conclusion that ein essay docha losas. So what kind of kasha is Gemara asking when Shabbos is both an essay and a lotas? But maybe we could say that with vis-a-vis the essay of Kibud, the essay of Shabbos is less. Now he applies this to Bas Kohen. The essay to Bas Kohen, Gemara is going to try to derive later on from Lo Sevaro Eish B'Chomosh Masechet that there's no Mises Bezdin on Shabbos. You cannot apply Sreifas Bas Kohen and implement it on Shabbos. What's bothering Tosfos? He says, essay the Bas Kohen that ain't Mises Bezdin like Sreifas Bas Kohen Dochas Shabbos. That dife may essay the Shabbos. Now, why is that a dife may essay the Shabbos? Right, we said that kibbut avayim is a dife may essay the Shabbos because of hukach kodem lekodem mokum. How are you going to apply that in binyan Beis Hamikdash or in Sreifas Bas Kohen? And the answer is mishum mora. Right, the Torah commands us to have awe for the Beis Hamikdash. That means that it's upgraded to a higher status. And mishum kapara de Bas Kohen. In other words, the essay is very important here because she committed a capital crime, and we have to quickly afford her with the possibility of a kapara. That's not something that we want to postpone. That also becomes a great essay, which we call Adifa Mi Essay de Shabbos. Now Tosfos Esvim Tomar. The Gemara finally at the conclusion says that in Achinami we talk about the Lav Mechamer. We're not going to derive from Mechamer to call it Tarkula that in Essay Dochalos Sevi Essay because here Mechamer is only a Hechsher Mitzvah. Rectosu Tomer Minola and Lodachi Essay the Kibud Afilu Lav greda. So if we're working with the svar of what? Of essay the kibud adif, the essay the Shabbos. Then even the maskana that we cannot derive another essay because in this case we're talking about an essay of a hechsher mitzvah. Tosfos thinks that doesn't make it so bad that in general. Ain't sparish hey garua kol kach to the alma re'alfina mikalayim to dachi lav great v'hacha b'yesei the kibud lo yidchel la the Shabbos v'tuma v'Shabbos atbeida who essay velosa said minu. There we say it's not docha. But in a lav, we should derive from Kalayim that it's just a dochi essay, nasi essay, dochi losa. Yishlom the came of the Golilon Kra, it's talking about the Poskani Hashem, the lo alimalon time of the hukash kodem l'kvod makom to litchi, meaning that it should be docha Shabbos. So as far as the hekesh of kvodem l'kvod makom, we have an essay of kibud that could be docha, even a lav in an essay. But when the Torah reveals to us that it's not docha, we can't afilu lelav greda nami lo docha. Lo mikalayim lo motzi gomer sheyiche shum the kibud havi hechsher. All right, so this last part of Tosfos we're gonna have to come back to, but in the meantime, let's see if we can look in the Yalkut Urim, see what we have. You have page what, Lamed Zayin? What was the one that did come out before?
Yeah, I had Lamed
Zayin. But the page that you just did now is Lamed Zayin?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, on the bottom of Lamed Hey, we really want to start on Lamed Vav, but just the last lines on Lamed Hey, the Gemara says, Elami Nazir, my time alone Gamrino. So why don't we derive from Nazir that as a general rule, Ese Docha Losas, legal Nifr Sheken Yechno B'She'elu. That means the lav of Nazir, which prohibits the Nazir from cutting his hair, is a secondary law because you can remove that law. And now we quoted a Rambam that a Nazir shenisrapi mitzarasa v'tochimei niziruso hareza megaleach kol si'or. And the Rambam says that tiglachas is a mitzvah asay, as in the case of mitzaras, the Torah says v'gilachas kol si'or. And the Rambam says that if there's no way of being mekayim the essay without violating the law, then we'll apply the principle of essay dochalosis. Then he says that the Nazir, when he cuts his hair during his Yemei Nazirus, he violates a lotas and an essay because it says Kadosh Yeh Godel Pera Siar Rosho. As a general rule, an essay cannot overpower a lotas and an essay. It says once the nazir became tameh, and we can no longer calculate his yemei nazirus, it's eno ola liyemei nazirus, so is harei eno kadosh b'hem. So during these days of Tumah, while he's mitzora, he doesn't have the mitzvah of kadosh yeh gadol pera. Al kain botel ha'esei me'elu. Lo nisher bo ki im losas. Shutar lo yavel al-rosh. Zficha bo esei sheteglachas v'dochos. So that's the Rambam. The Rambam has a big chiddush here. He says what's going on with esei dochalosa in the case of mitzora and nazir. After all, nazir is both an essay and a los essay because the Torah added kadosh yeh gadol pera. And Tosfos answers no. We're talking about a Kohen, a Nazir, who is Tameh, and that means he's got Tumas Tzaras. That Tumas Tzaras blocks the counting of these days as a kiyum of Yemei Nazirus, and therefore there's no essay here of Kadosh Yeh Gadol Pera. You're left with a Los essay, and now we're going to say essay Dochalosis. So the essay of Mitzora overrides the lotus of tar lo yala al rosho of nazir in the case of nazir mitzora, and forget about the essay of kadosh yeh in the case of nazir, because since he's tomei betumas mitzora, therefore he's not kadosh as far as the essay of kadosh yeh gadol pera. So what you're left with, as we said before, is just a lot. So the Ravid asks, what about our sugi? The Gemara says that the essay of Mitzorah is Docha the Lav and the essay of Nazirus. And why is that? Bishum Yeshnam She'elam. In other words, the Gemara doesn't blink or whisper a word about the fact that since he's Tomei, this Nazir, B'tumas Tzaras, therefore there's no Kedusha, it's not all a minion, and that's why it becomes a secondary law. So how do we reconcile our Gemara with the Rambam? The Rambam is saying that Nazir is demoted, as we said earlier, because it's a los essay without an essay, by virtue of the fact that he's Tomei Tumas Tzaras. Whereas the Gemara says that we're going to demote Nazir because of Yeshno B'She'elim. Kosav HaKesev Mishnah, Sheshnei Ta'amim Yesh B'Tov. We really have two explanations as to why the lav of Nazir is demoted. Gemara nokta echad mihem, but Rambam noket is mishneu. So the Gemara says that the reason why it's demoted is because of she'ela, and the Rambam says it's demoted because of Tumas Tzaras, which undermines and removes the essay of Kodesh Yir. Says the Kesef Mishnah, okay, that's fine. There are two different reasons. The Gemara mentioned one, the Ram mentions another. He doesn't address the question why the Rambam offered an alternative explanation. V'tomu achronim al dvar. Harei shnei ta'amelu sosrim zetze. Im achena esei b'nozim mitzor botol me'ikaro, where the Rambam has it, Eichom Ragemar Shnitchem Neku Losam. As the Gemara is saying that the reason why we could override the essay in the case of the Nazir's of Mitzorah is because that essay lends itself to She'ela. It's got a kula in it. And the Rambam is saying that there is no essay at all because he's Tamei B'tumas Saras. V'yod kosher Shem Kain L'shemat Sorech Es Rosho Lamdenu Al Nazir Mitzor Shemuta B'tiglachas Harei Ein Bo Essay Klal. According to the Rambam, you remove the essay of Kadoshia in the case of Mitzorah, you left with the lav greater. So why do I need the pasuk Rosho? I have to speak for some parashas of Kalayim Mitzitzis, and therefore I can apply essay Dochalosas because you've completely removed the essay of Nazir. Or at Baz Kosa, Shadover Toli Machlokas Asugis. That Enochinami, the Rambam is against our Gemara, but that's because he's standing on the shoulders of a different sugi. In our sugi, it's clear that a Nazir Mitzorah has an essay of Nazirus, just as Yeshna B'She'ela. But we have another Gemara, another sugya, the Perek Gimel Minin, which, if I'm not mistaken, is in the Masechet Nazir. Not familiar. She'esei shel Mitzorah docha lo taseh shel Nazir. Mashma mizeh the ein bo ben Nazir Elolah below essay. Because there is no essay. So that's the Radbaz. Just to summarize, Radbaz is saying that there are really two sugyas as to whether or not Nazir, in the case of Mitzorah, has an essay. Our sugya assumes there is an essay, whereas the sugya in Nazir assumes that there is no essay. So the Rambam is simply reflecting the sugya in Nazir. Now he quotes an Avnei Milu. And the Avnei Miluim is vacillating on the question whether the Yisur Nazir is Shavah Bakol. Is it a lav Shavah Bakol? And according to the Sugya Nazir, the Yisur Nazirus is his Kadjus Guf Hanodeh. And all the Yisur Machal Memele. Very nice. It's not Shavah Bakol because you've changed the personality, transformed the Gavra into his Kadshus Gufa. And all the Isurim that apply to Nazir are a result of his status with his Kadshus Gufa that has no application to anyone else on the face of the earth. L'fizeh, Ein ha'she'ela po'eles al etzem isurei ha'nazir In other words, the fact that a Nazir can be shoel on the Zirusa has nothing to do with the Isser Nazir. It's not a kula in the law. Shrei Einam Chalam Olav Nikah Kabbalas Piv Ishar Nidarim. In other words, all Nidarim except for Nazir means that you accept upon yourself an Isser. In the case of Nazir, you accept upon yourself Kedusha. Valkein Ein Biyada Lafkiyah. Not sure what he means by that. It is she'ela in all the Dharam. I'm not sure what he means by Alkein Ein Biyada Lafkiyah. So what happens in Nazir? She'ela Mafkiyas Keduchas Niziru. So Revela Mistalkim Aisurim Mimenu Me'achesh Shekvar Eno Nazir. Lefichach ein isurav bechlal yeshnam b'she'ela. So I think again what he seems to be saying here in the Avnei is that it's not a kula in the lav. Right? We're looking for a kula in the lav. Lav shein yishav b'kol means there's something weak about the lav. Here the lav is a perfectly healthy and strong lav. The only problem is the lav is engendered by Kedushas Nazirus, and now he's removing through She'ela as Kedushas Nazirus. Avla Mavur Besugi Beperk Sheni Nazirin Together Nazirus who Iser Yayin or Iser Piv Biyayin B'Sei'ara B'Tiglachas Shar Nidarim Shebechefza Al Kein Heim Isurim HaShavim B'Kol. Because now we're comparing it to Shar Nidarim. Nimta ki al yidei she'elu mafkias etzem ha'isurim she'aser b'hem hu atzmo en chaper netchem liyetna b'she'elu me'ato yishna b'sugya seinu hikishitas ha'sugya na al kein docha gemara she'minazir iklu mifrat she'ken yetna b'she'elu v'ramam no kikisugya sa'gemara b'pek shal sheminim Valkein hishmit svara zu b'nasan tam acher l'kach shasei the mitzvah docha lav the esesh on the zivus. Wow, this is profound. I guess anything the Avnei Miluim says is profound. He's basically saying that there are two ways of understanding she'ela in the zivus. And that reflects on two ways of understanding the Isser Nazir. I mean, you're going one level deeper and deeper and deeper until you get to the kishkis of it, the real foundation of it. He says that one way of understanding the way Nazirus operates is that it's Kedushas Nazir. And in that case, the She'ela doesn't say a thing, doesn't make a dent in terms of what the nature of the Isurim are. She'ela doesn't mean that these Isurim are less severe than any other Isurim. But rather what She'ela means is that he removes his Kedushas Nazir. Memela, all the Isurim fall away. However, our sugya, and also one sugya in Shnei Nazirim, understands that all these Surim of Nazir are like any other Isurim in the Torah, that generated by the fact that he accepted upon himself Naziris. Has nothing to do, it's not a result of Kedushas HaNazir. And if that be the case, when we treat the Isurim of a Nazir like any other Isur in the Torah, then She'ela, which removes the Isur itself, that makes it a Kula in this Isur, because this Isur can be removed by She'ela. That's what the Gemara means when it says Yeshna B'She'ela. The Rambam doesn't have the luxury of using that Yeshna B'She'ela, because the Rambam holds that the She'ela is not on the Isur Nazir, but on the Kedushas Agav. So there's no real kula here in Yeshna B'She'ela. Yeshna B'She'ela doesn't prove anything about the nature of the lav. It's proving that the mechanism is that the lav is generated by Kedushas Nazir, and She'ela removes the Kedushas Nazir. And therefore the Rambam says the Avnei Miluim, if I can use this proverbial phrase, had to rack his brains and come up with an alternative as to why we can't derive Esei Dochalosa in the case of the lav of Nazir. And the answer is because we're removing the Esei by virtue of the Tumas Saras. So we have to end soon, but let's just read the last paragraph one more time. And he says the following. Ha'im isurei nazir shovim bakol olo. The das hasuya shem perek shlosha minim geder isudos is kadshus guf hanoder the isurei darm kalam mela val kenech shav isuro ke'enom shovim bakol. V'zeh ein ha'she'ela poelas al etzid isurei nazir. Because we're holding now that the Isurei Nazir is a result of this Kadshus HaNazir. And I think you see those words that I got stuck with before, stuck on, it said Al Kanein Biyod Lafkim. It means, had it been that these were Isurim that emanate from his Kabbalah's pen, that really like other Isurim, then he would have no power apparently to remove them. Again, I'm not sure about that. The fact that She'ela does successfully b'mafkia removes the Isurei Nazir, that's because the Isurei Nazir are a result of Kedushas Nizirusa. And that makes the lav of Nazir into a lav she'en shavim bakol. Again, the essence and the germ that generates Isurei Nazir is Kedushas Nazir, and the She'ela operates in a way that it removes Kedushas Nazirus. And therefore all these Isurim fall off the Mela. He's no longer Nazir. But the Isurim themselves do not lend themselves to She'ela. She'ela only operates because it removes the Kedushas Nazir. And that's the way the Rambam learns the Sugya in Perek Shlosha Minim. Now we have another Sugya in Perek Shnei Nazirim, and also our Sugya. Here we're assuming the Naziris is not a bunch of Isurim that are generated by Kedushas Nazir, but rather they are Isurim that are like all Isurei Torah. It's just you need his piv, his aflas pen, in order to create those Isurim. But those Isurim, once they emerge, they're like any other Isurim. And therefore they are Isurim Hashav B'Kol, as if to say anybody can take upon himself these Isurim. Whereas the Sugya that we started with in Perek Shlosh Minim, that's assuming no, these Isurim are only result of the status change and the Kedusha of the Gavna, which makes it into a Lav She'eino Shavim. But if we go with the Sugya in Shnei Nazirim, then we're assuming that on the one hand, Nazir is a Lav Sheshava Bakol, but on the other hand, he can remove these Isurim through She'ela. And that's what the Gemara means here when it says Yeshnam B'She'ela. The Rambam, he's going like the sugi that we began with in Shlosha Minu, that the nature of the Isurim Avel and all the Isurim emanate from the Kedusha Gavra, which makes it into a Lav Shein Neshama Bakol. But on the other hand, you can't operate with Ken Yeshlam She'ela, because She'ela doesn't indicate in any way that the Lav is on a low level. We're not demoting the Lav, we're just removing the status of the Nazir as sanctified with Kedushas Nazir. So the Rambam has to omit this Svara and come up with an alternative Svara as to why the essay of Mitzvah is Docha the Lav and the essay of Naziris. After all, we have a principle, an essay Docha Lo Sevi essay. And don't tell me because the Lota says is Yeshnam B'She'ela, because that Yeshnam B'She'ela doesn't in any way indicate that the Isur is less of a severe Isur. It's only because the She'ela removes the Kedushas Nazir. And therefore the Rambam had to plug in another reason to explain why the essay of Mitzorah is Docha the Lav and the essay of Nazir. And his answer was because once he contaminates himself with Tumas Mitzorah, now he doesn't have the level of Kedushas Nazir. Therefore, the essay is dry. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop here on the bottom of the right column on Daf Lamed Vav. And I'll wish you a